Some people say that the greatest fear that people have is of public speaking. In fact, some people say that people fear public speaking more than they fear death. So does that mean once you become a public speaker, if you give up your fears, no more fear of death, no more fear of anything? No. There's one great fear that all public speakers have that lurks in the background. Not something they talk about, not something they may think about, but it's always there. It's something that they avoid and stay away from, if they can. Because the idea of facing this fear is terrifying. And that is the fear of giving interviews. You see, when you're a public speaker, you have everything all laid out for you. You know exactly what you're going to say. No question about it. But when you're giving an interview, anything could happen. The interviewer can ask you about anything. We've all seen interviews where the interviewer makes the person they're interviewing look stupid or uninformed or just clueless. And nobody wants to be in that situation. So, public speakers, a little nervous about giving interviews. You never know what might happen. But there are three things you can keep in mind when giving an interview that can help you. And we're going to talk more in depth about those three things today. First thing to think about when you're in an interview is you want to be nice. You want to be likable. You want people to like you. You want them to invite you back. You want to do a good job. Because the more times you do interviews, the more likable you are, the more they have you on, the more exposure you get. So you give interviews and you're nice, you're friendly, you're likable. Very important. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the person says. You may strongly disagree. That's okay. If you want to be somebody they want to invite back again, keep your cool. Don't blow up. You blow up, you get upset, there are going to be problems. You don't want problems. And a little note about nodding. Nodding is one of those things, once you start, you really can't stop. And pretty soon you find yourself going up and down like this, like one of those bobbleheads. Now, this doesn't say much, except I agree with every single thing coming out of your mouth. So only nod when you're in agreement with a person, and only nod 3 times at most. 3 nods is fine. After that, you let go of the nodding. So they make their point, you agree, okay, that's enough. Don't go crazy about nodding. And be careful not to start nodding at things you disagree at. If somebody is interviewing you and they make a point you don't agree with, don't nod. Very important. So watch the nodding. And part of being nice is also being a little paranoid. Just pretend that that microphone in front of you is always on. Every moment you're there, you've got a microphone in front of you, it's on. Doesn't matter if you can clearly see the switch on the sides is off. Doesn't matter if they tell you the microphone is off. Doesn't matter if they tell you it's off the record. Forget about that. That microphone is on all the time. And if you keep that in your mind, you'll be okay. You won't say any things that you'll regret later. There was a famous situation that happened a while back when somebody thought the microphone was off, and they made a joke, and it was at a political rally. They said something like, "We begin bombing in 5 minutes," and it went out on a live microphone, and it got played over and over and over again. Don't want that to happen. You don't want to be the person with that funny microphone slip-up. Because one is it makes you look not nice, and two, it just causes problems. So always pretend the microphone is on. In fact, go a little further. Pretend for the moment you get into where you're being interviewed, if that's on the phone, if that's just inside some studio, if that's at a radio set, whatever it is, the moment you step foot in that area, you're on the air. Just pretend you're on the air. Pretend every single thing you say, every single thing you do is going to be looked at, examined, and brought up to you later. So nothing is off the record. Don't even try to say things off the record. If you aren't comfortable talking about it, don't bring it up. And if they bring it up, make sure every answer you give is something that you wanted to give, not an answer you felt pressure into having to answer. So every time you get up there in front of them, you're on the air. Your microphone's live. And finally, last thing to think about is don't do any personal attacks. Always attack what you're talking about. Attack it with great excitement, with great power. Don't attack people. Attacking people is easy. It's easy to point fingers. And some people do it. They get away with it. It's no problem at all. They just attack people all over the place. But even if everybody agrees with you, that makes you a people attacker. And on some level or another, nobody really wants to be around a people attacker because they always think, and rightly so, what if I'm next? So be really careful about attacking people. Focus on the problem, not on the people. That should get you far. Those are the basics of being nice, things to think about when you're out there, when you're up in front of everyone. Next thing to do is how to handle all those questions the interviewer is throwing at you. Another thing you can do when you're being interviewed is to ask questions. You can ask the interviewer pointed questions. So the interviewer is going to ask you questions, and some of those are going to be difficult questions. So you can ask questions back. And the whole purpose of asking questions back is to establish a balance. So you don't feel like everything's all about you answering. It's also about the interviewer answering. Makes things a little fairer, takes the pressure off of you. So if you ask pointed questions that have to do with what they're questioning on, then that can help. The challenge is to ask questions back but not sound defensive. You just have to sound like you're honestly trying to find out more information. So if they ask you harsh questions like, how come your company is stealing millions of dollars? You can ask a question back such as, where did you hear our company was stealing millions of dollars? Then they'll hopefully give you a source or a place they heard this, and then you can respond from that. When you get one of these tough questions, ask a question back, very pointedly. And that can help to reestablish balance in the question situation. It's also important when you ask these questions that you be yourself. You don't want to put on airs or try to be fancy out there. You just want to be who you are. So the whole purpose isn't to impress the interviewer. The point is to get that point across, that all-important point. We'll talk more about that later. But be yourself when you do it. This will also make the interview flow more naturally. If you feel you're putting on an act, you're reading stuff that just doesn't work with you, interview's not going to work. People are going to know it. It's going to sound forced, fake. You don't want that. So remember, when you're going through this question process, be yourself. Be comfortable with what you're saying. And be aware. Pay attention to what questions this interviewer is asking you and how they're asking the questions. How they ask those questions has a lot to do with what type of response you're going to give. Some questions will come at you, they're straightforward, they're fine. You can just answer those questions. You don't need to question the interviewer back. Other questions that seem targeted, nasty, those you may want to ask the interviewer back a question. So they just ask the question of, how are you? You don't say, well, how are you? You don't need to go there that early. Asking questions back is something you only want to do when you feel a little bit pushed against the wall for the question. That means you have to be very aware of those questions. Very aware of what is being said and how it's being said. And finally, take a look at the question itself and see if you can use that question to get the idea back in an interesting way. So you can actually use the question to further develop the conversation. Now, how you do that is going to differ. It's going to differ from person to person, who's interviewing and how they're interviewing you. But think about that. Is there any way I can ask a question back that makes the interview more interesting, that puts things in a slightly different way? And it will depend upon what question you're asked, how you're asked it. But if you can put the question back to them in a different sort of way, force them to look at it a completely different way, then that can also take some of the pressure off too. They're questioning on one thing, you ask a question back that pushes the whole interview in a completely different type of direction. The interviewer, of course, will try to pull it back to where it was, but you've gotten a little bit of advantage, a little bit of breathing time while you're up there. Questioning the interviewer back is something you certainly can do when you feel pressed up against the wall. You feel really pushed back, then you can question the interviewer back. Because you never should go into an interview in a situation where you feel that type of pressure. And if you do, there's a good chance that the interviewer is somebody who's interviewing in a way that just isn't going to work well for you. So you need to change that style they have, move it into something that works better for you. And one way to do that is to ask questions back. We talked about the importance of being nice, talked about the importance of asking questions. There's one more thing you can do out there as an interviewer to make the interview go well. The final thing we'll talk about is the importance of getting that point across to the interviewer. If you're being interviewed, you have to have that point in mind all the time. And something we talked about before, you're talking about how to question the interviewer, also applies here. And that is, see if you can say something interesting, some little short section, and that will then become the soundbite, your point. So if you have an interesting soundbite for your point, then you're in a good situation. You may take that soundbite, that little tiny clip, and use that to lead off the interview. One professional speaker who talks about how a business can handle their finances has this little catchphrase: cash and control. You can have both. Interesting, short, pointed, nice little soundbite, nice little clip. Something you can open up the whole interview with. That works. So think about it. Your response is, how can you keep on point and say it in an interesting way that works? Just a minor point while you're up there to make sure you're on point, to make sure that your audience is focused on your point. If you're on television, don't look at the monitors. If you're talking to the host and the host is over here and you're all the time looking like this, so Bob, what I really want to talk about is the importance of cash and control and having both. You're going to look very strange. So look at the host if you're on television. Don't look at those monitors. It's tempting. Those monitors are right there in front of you, right there, and you see yourself there. You may want to just see what you look like on television. Wait. Wait until after the interview. Then you can see what you look like on television. Otherwise, you'll see that you look like an idiot on television talking to the monitors instead of to the host. And in all of these things, to stay on point and to make that point interesting, make it personal. Talk a little bit about your personal background. Why you? Why this point? Why now? Who cares? Talk about how what you're talking about has influenced your life. This person who says cash and control, you can have both, has a background of being on Wall Street, being an entrepreneur, lost her job, now has to go on her own. She has this interesting background that gives credibility to what she says. She's been there, done that. She can help you get through the problems that she had and figure out a way to help you get through the problems so you don't have to face them in the way that she did. But it's personal, very personal. So if you can't have personal points in there, because the audience, in order to focus on your point, they want to see a person, not just a talking head, not just somebody talking up there about whatever. They want to find out who you are. And if they care about you, then they'll consider the point. They don't like you, forget about the point. You're never going to get to it. So think about that. Think about being personal. And finally, to make sure your point gets across, know your interviewer. Is it a political interview? Make sure your point has something to do with politics. Is this person kind of a shock interviewer? They're trying to get you out of your seat, trying to rattle you. Know that about your interviewer too. See if you can say something that interests them, maybe startles them, but makes your point. Maybe they're fact-focused, just the facts. It's all they want to hear. Nail it down with the facts. Here's my point here. All the facts that support it. However you do it, get that point across. There you have it. The things you need to do to face that fear of being interviewed and of giving interviews. 3 things. One is to be nice. If you're nice out there, then it takes a lot of the pressure off of you. People like nice people. You aren't as hard on nice people. So you want to be nice to the interviewer. Really important. Sounds like a little thing, but actually it's a huge thing. First of all, it makes you more comfortable. And then it also makes the interviewer more comfortable. It just wins on both sides. So make sure you're nice, make sure you're respectful. That's an old word, respect. been around for a while, and these days it doesn't really get so much play, but it's an important thing. Be respectful to that interviewer. They're interviewing you. Hopefully they're going to start promoting whatever it is you want to promote. They're interviewing you, but it gives you that opportunity to get your message across to your audience. So they're doing you a favor. You want to be respectful and be nice. Secondly, remember, things get hairy. You can always question the interviewer. You can always ask questions back. It's not just one way. It's not just the interviewer asking questions to you. It's not just always inward coming. You can ask questions back. But pay attention to how the interview is going. If it's going pretty well, things seem to be going fine, maybe you don't want to ask questions back. Everything's going fine, there's no reason to push back on the interviewer. Because if you do ask questions back, that definitely will be something defensive. Something that might even cause offense on the interviewer if they aren't ready for it. Usually you ask questions back when you feel you're getting pushed to the wall, and you ask questions back to stay in the game with the interviewer. So feel it out. See what feels comfortable, what doesn't. And when you ask questions back, it's a great opportunity to do something a little bit different. Capture their attention. That brings us to the third, final point of keeping the point. Staying on point. It's so easy in these interviewers, when they take you all over the place, to wander off the point. Forget why you're there. The reason why you're there. The point you're making. Don't forget that. Stay on that point. Keep that point. Whatever the point is. And just like with the questions, if you can make it interesting for the interviewer, if you can have an interesting way to say your point, then that's going to be picked up. That's going to be noticed. The interviewer is going to pay attention to that. So keep in mind that all-important point that underlies everything you're doing out there. The whole reason you agreed to do the interview and be interviewed is because you had a point to get across. Maybe it's something you're selling. Maybe it's something you're promoting. Maybe it's some sort of change you want to happen. Maybe your business asked you to go out there and talk about things. Whatever it is, it's that point that you want to get across. So focus in on that. One of the great fears speakers have is of losing control. And that's why speakers fear interviews, because they aren't in control. They don't control everything that happens, where everything goes. But you keep in mind these three things. You can have some control over that interview. Be nice. Be respectful. That'll lessen, hopefully, the pressure they put on you. Ask questions back. Take control of the interview and ask questions back to the interviewer. Finally, keep on point. Keep control of the interview by staying on point and keeping to that point. Interviews can be scary. We've all seen interviews where things go south and the person interviewed looks like an idiot. You don't want that to happen to us. If you keep in mind these three things we talked about, you can go out there